Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest headlines in the sport. This week, we've got Nolan King from out in Boston, Goes from right here in Las Vegas with me, and Matthew Wells from the great state of Texas. So let's just get into it, guys. At this past weekend's UFC 267, we saw Glover Teixeira claim the UFC light heavyweight title at 42 years old, capping off a long journey to the top for the beloved Brazilian. Now, it wasn't that long ago that Teixeira was mired in a 2-3 slump. He then rattled off 6 straight wins, including 5 of those by stoppage, to claim UFC gold. Is that run, especially when you consider his age, the greatest career comeback we've ever seen in the UFC? Nolan, I stole this question from your timeline, so it's only right that you start us out. Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. You get us going.
Yeah, I might be in the minority here, but I do. Maybe it's recency bias, but I think honestly what Glover Teixeira did this past weekend at UFC 267 was pretty unprecedented. Sure, he's always been a top contender. He's not. I know some people were saying, "Oh, Jan Blachowicz, his comeback, his career comeback was better." But I'll tell you why I think Glover Teixeira's was better, and that's the fact that he hit a point where all the odds were against him. He was fighting Father Time. He was fighting the division. Everybody that had beat him was above him in the rankings, and it just seemed like that there was no way that the UFC, even if he were to go on a win streak, would want to put a guy that had lost to Anthony Rumble Johnson, had lost to Alexander Gustafsson, had lost to John Jones, had lost to Corey Anderson, back in a title position. But sure enough, he forced their hand, and time kind of changed the division. People moved in and out, and he got that opportunity and defied the odds over and over and over again. I mean, he was an underdog in this fight and seemed like he should have been a pretty moderate favorite with how well he did against Jan Blachowicz. So for Glover Teixeira to go on this run, at such a late stage in his career, I believe the last time he lost, he was 38. He was almost 39 years old. For him to go on such a win streak, to become the oldest first-time champion ever, man, to me, that's the greatest comeback right there. There have been a lot of other good ones. Maybe we're comparing apples and oranges, bananas here, and it's tough to kind of weigh all this stuff together. But for me, what Glover Teixeira did on Saturday night may never be done again. It was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, recency bias, like you said, is a very real thing, but this is a great story. I mean, it's got to be up there at the top at least. Maybe there's a couple other ones that are similar, but Goes, what do you think? Greatest career comeback of all time?
It's right there up there, man. The only thing I can argue on this one is I just feel like the level of opponents at this point is a little different than maybe some of the other ones in the past. So I'm going to go to one that's a little true to my heart. It's Robbie Lawler's career. I'm a big fan of what he did. You got to remember, he did some work early on in the UFC, and then he was actually released. So he had to go other places, and he kind of reestablished himself at Icon and even had a taste of pride here in Las Vegas, and Strikeforce and Elite XC is where he started to rebuild that career. When the UFC brought him back, he wasn't on really any kind of crazy streak or nothing like that. But it was Murderer's Row. It was top challenger, former champion. I mean, it was nonstop top-level competition. And he finally won that belt. And I thought that was a really special moment for a lot of people that had started off in that first era of the UFC and made it to that second one. And then I feel like he kind of had almost to reinvent himself again with another comeback. When you come back and you see what happened with Nick Diaz, to me, that's probably as close as you can come to winning a title. I mean, he's not anywhere near being in title contention, but coming back and kind of righting that wrong, I felt like he almost did it a second time and got us all up on our feet for the older fighter. So I think that's my pick if I had to pick one.
It's a great shout as well. Not often you leave the organization and then come back and get all the way to the top. Matt, what do you think? Is there another name that sticks out to you, or is this that great of a run from Glover Teixeira?
I mean, it certainly is like that great of a run for me. If I had to think of another name, you'd think about Michael Bisping for me, a guy who came back on short notice to fight a guy that he already lost to in Luke Rockhold. But for me, I think Glover's run is just a little bit better, man, because he put together a 5-fight win streak to get that first title fight against Jones, and then he lost that fight. And if you count that loss to Jones, until he went on this other win streak that he's on now, he was a 500 fighter. So he really turned things around and put together this late career resurgence. That's, for me, it's the best, man. And I couldn't be happier that it happened to a guy that's so universally liked too. So it's just a great story. I don't know how long his reign is going to be at the top, but hey, the fact that he got there and reached the pinnacle, it's one of those stories where it's like you never give up. And you just keep sticking to your guns and good things will happen. So I'm really happy for Glover. And for me, it's that one.
Yeah, it's got to be right there. We're kind of splitting hairs with some of these, right? All great stories. But I think the one thing, and you touched on it, Matt, so universally loved. I mean, have you seen anybody out there that just isn't absolutely ecstatic for Glover Teixeira that he got this done at this age as well? It's a pretty cool story either way. You guys, one of the biggest storylines of UFC 267 was the much anticipated return of Khamzat Chimaev. And man, did he deliver with an incredible first round technical submission over Li Jingliang. Now, the performance was simply dominant. A lot of people seem to think a fight with Nate Diaz is the next move for Khamzat at this time. So what do you think, guys? Is that the fight to make right now? Or do you have something better in mind for Khamzat Chimaev? Goes, let's put 4 minutes on the clock. You get it started.
Well, the thing is this, man. First thing, if this is Nate Diaz's last fight in the UFC, I can't see how they possibly wouldn't set him up with Conor McGregor just to kind of end that trilogy. But if it was that easy, I think they would have done it by now. I think this is a great fight. I think it's perfect timing for Khamzat. I think it's a terrible fight for Nate Diaz. I mean, you have a guy that's on a big win streak, but he doesn't really have that signature name, right? And I think like a Nate Diaz win is that type of name that kind of throws him in that discussion. It makes him jump a few people. I think a win over Nate Diaz gets him right there. The casual fan and the hardcore fan would be all about that fight. But stylistically, it's just terrible. The thing that kind of irks me for the Diaz brothers, and this goes across for Nick and Nate, I guess you don't really have to worry about where they're at in the rankings. You don't have to worry about where they're at in the title picture or what streak they're on. You just tune in because you know they're going to give you a scrap. And you know they're going to not only give you a good fight on fight night, but they're going to help promote that fight and get you to buy that pay-per-view. And I feel like that, combined with Khamzat and the way he is, I think people will be motivated. I think they'll be fired up for the fight. Business-wise, I don't know if it makes sense. But fan-wise, I think people would be all about it.
Yeah, that's what intrigues me about that idea. For all the things you say, I understand why it would be a great fight, especially for Khamzat Chimaev, but I don't know if Nate wants that. So, Matt, what do you think? Is there a better fight to make, or is that the one?
There's a lot better fights out there, but when I say I have zero desire to see this matchup, I mean zero whatsoever. I'm tired of fighters, winning a fight and then hitting the Diaz button. Like they have that red button and that has Diaz on it and they just smash it in their interviews. I'm tired of that. Let's get past that. I mean, especially for Nate Diaz. I mean, the last time this guy put together more than 2 wins in a row was like back in 2007, 2008. I mean, he beat Michael Johnson and Conor McGregor back to back, and then he is 1-3 since then. And I mean, like who wants to really see that when you're just talking about a guy in Chimaev who is every bit of like the next title challenger in my opinion. I mean, you go back to the 1-3 thing, right? Like 1-3 is kind of an interesting number because if you look at Chimaev in his last 3 fights, none of his opponents landed a single strike on him. So we're talking about a guy in Nate Diaz who gets tagged a lot, who didn't look particularly great in his fight against Leon Edwards until he landed that one punch in the last, 30 seconds. And then people think he won that fight. But for me, no. Let's do Neil Magny. He's a ranked guy. He wants that fight. And that's a guy who's been winning a lot more recently. So that's the fight for me.
Man, Matt, next time, tell us how you really feel, man. I wish you wouldn't just hold back. Doesn't like the matchup at all. It's safe to say. Nolan, how about you? Is it the fight to make or not?
Hell no. Matt hit it right on the head. I mean, that fight doesn't make any sense to me. I know that Nate's on the last fight of his deal. Just seems like such a difficult matchup stylistically. I think that whoever Khamzat fights next is, if as long as it's somebody 1 through 10, it's going to be a big fight. It's going to be something that people are interested in. And for Nate, I mean, it just to me seems like such a steep climb for him to go against somebody that's that strong of a wrestler and is surging right now. I don't know. It just doesn't really make much sense for either guy, in my opinion. Does that mean the UFC will book it? I mean, they might. It seemed like they're definitely interested, but I kind of like Matt's suggestion to Neil Magny. I think, if we're just rattling off some other names, Michael Chiesa has a fight against Sean Brady coming up. Maybe if he wins that one, I'd like to see Khamzat fight somebody in that range. Li Jingliang, I think, was ranked number 11. So he beat somebody in the 10 to 15 range. Let's give him somebody in the 5 to 10 range. Somebody like Bilal Muhammad, somebody like I just mentioned, Michael Chiesa, somebody in there. That's what I would like to see next.
I kind of agree with you guys. I want to see him fighting ranked opposition because we know that's the direction that he's going in, right? I will put my tinfoil hat on for just a little second here and saying maybe the UFC will offer Nate Diaz that fight, knowing that he probably doesn't want it either, at which point his contract, gets extended a little bit, and then that gives Conor McGregor a little bit of time to kind of heal up and then make that trilogy fight for the last fight in his contract. So we'll see. I don't know if that's what they're thinking, but seems like a way to maybe get there, because I think we all want to see that trilogy fight, especially if it's going to be Nate Diaz's last fight in the UFC. Hey guys, UFC 267 also saw a bold statement from Islam Makhachev, who says he's ready for a title shot following a first-round submission victory over Dan Hooker. Now, of course, we've also got Justin Gaethje versus Michael Chandler coming up this weekend. You got names out there like Rafael dos Anjos, like Beneil Dariush, that are kind of hovering around the top right there. And, of course, there's always Conor McGregor, who seemingly can just get a title fight like anytime he wants it. So sort this thing out for us moving forward. Is Makhachev getting a title shot in his next fight? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Matt, kick it off.
No, I don't, because the lightweight division is super tough to get a title shot in. I mean, you look at guys like Tony Ferguson, who needed 12 wins to get his shot, and even then, that was an interim shot. Islam's coach, Habib, he had to get 9 wins, and Islam is on 9 wins now as well. But there's a key difference here now, and the key difference is, compared to both of those other guys, we have an active champion. So we're not fighting for an interim title. We're not fighting for a vacant title. Oliveira is out there about to defend his belt. So we have an active champion who's here, who's willing to fight, ready to fight, and is about to fight next month. So I think for Islam, you're going to have to end up getting one more win. It depends on how these fights coming up shake out. Like, you have Gaethje versus Chandler coming up this weekend. How does that fight play out? You know, is it an impressive win for either guy? Is it a close fight? He could very well fight the winner or the loser of that fight. Just depends on how it goes. So if I'm Islam, I'm waiting on the sidelines until the year is out, till UFC 268, till UFC 269, see how this all shakes out. You could find yourself in a title fight depending on how things play out if somebody gets injured. So just sit on the sidelines and chill for a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you can make the case for Islam right now, right? And, of course, you got the Habib Nurmagomedov factor behind him as well. He's singing his praises out there trying to make things happen. But there's a whole lot that's still left to play out. So, Nolan, what do you think? Is Islam next, or what do we have to wait on to figure out what's going to happen?
You know, going into this weekend, I would have said the winner of Michael Chandler versus Justin Gaethje should get the next shot. But Islam kind of convinced me with that performance, man. I mean, that was really dominant. Number 5 versus number 6. He went in there and made it look easy. I mean, yeah, I love Dan Hooker as much as the next guy, but let's face it, Islam Makhachev schooled him. And for somebody that's at an elite level like Dan Hooker to have that much of an issue, to me, Islam Makhachev hasn't had that big opportunity yet. He hasn't had that title shot. Michael Chandler's had that title shot somewhat recently. Justin Gaethje's had that title shot somewhat recently. And I know Habib's not the champion anymore, so these are all fresh matchups across the board, with the exception of Charles Oliveira. If he wins, him and Chandler already fought. But all these other ones are relatively fresh, or rematches from a while ago. So it's difficult. That's working against Islam. But, I mean, look at the type of performance he put on. And it's just so reminiscent of Habib and what he did in that division, and how he struggled to find matchups and sometimes didn't get to fight very often. So for me, I'm going with Islam. I would like to see that next. I know the UFC has their deal with Abu Dhabi. Seems like a fight that they would want to put there. I think Dana even mentioned it at the post-fight news conference. So to me, I would go with Islam. I think he's done enough, and he's proven to be, quite frankly, a very terrifying opponent, maybe the best 155-pounder in the world.
It's a great point. I mean, I think we knew it was a tough matchup for Dan Hooker, but I didn't think it was going to go like that. Islam actually went in there and steamrolled him. So was that enough, or do we have to see how things play out with some of these other fights? What do we do now?
I think we need to see things play out. I think Islam's probably going to have to sit on the shelf just a little bit. The names that are in front of him, I mean, I would have to say that he's 1, maybe even 2, depending on what plays out in some of these fights, injuries. And let's not forget, like you mentioned, the Conor McGregor factor. He's not always one fight away from a title shot. He's like 1 sentence away. All he has to do is say the right thing, and the UFC will jump all over it. So you never know what's going to happen. But I think he has to be real selective with his next fight. I think he needs a good name, a good solid name, maybe even the loser of Chandler Gaethje or someone like that. I think that could probably put him in a good position. But the best thing to do if you're him right now is just stay ready. Be that guy that could jump in at any moment, because there's a lot going on at the top. I just think it's going to be hard for him to jump over a few of those names. So just stay ready, and maybe you could be the next guy that way. But I think you have to let things play out.
Yeah, you said it right there. Stay ready, because he's at least in the discussion. We know that, and injuries happen, and different things happen in life, so you never know what's going to be there. So he needs to stay ready because he's in the discussion. I kind of wonder if the best thing for him to be would be to see Michael Chandler win and then Charles Oliveira win, and hope the UFC isn't really interested in making that rematch again right away. Then you get to slide in there. So we'll definitely know more by December. That's for sure. As the PFL wrapped up its 2021 season this past week, I think they wrapped it up. It might still be going on. I'm not sure. But anyway, I think they wrapped it up. It was a rather entertaining night of fights, even if the pacing did leave us just a little bit to be desired. So with another $6 $1 million checks being handed out, what were the biggest surprises for you along the way? And what takeaways are you left with heading into the 2022 season? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Nolan, you get it started.
My biggest takeaway is actually Ray Cooper's star power. He's a guy that's kind of floated at the top of that division. He's somebody that's competed in multiple seasons for PFL. He's won 2 of them that he's been in. So he's always been somebody I think that I've always thought of as a good fighter, a very one of the best in PFL. But for whatever reason, I think PFL's kind of struggled to produce their own stars. I think we recognize a lot of these guys are good. The guys that win the tournaments are good. But for whatever reason, unlike Bellator, who's kind of done a good job, I think, of once in a while cultivating a homegrown star like Patricio Pitbull or Douglas Lima, I hadn't really seen that with the exception of Kayla Harrison in PFL. But I think Ray Cooper, the way that he won against who he won against in the PFL championship, he kind of emerged as a star. He's somebody that we've always thought of as good, but he needed to rack up a lot of wins in a row. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe just the PFL format, the fact that we see some of these guys lose in regular seasons and then 2 fights later, they win the PFL title, even though we just saw them lose. I think that might be part of it. Ray just having that consistency. But man, he is exciting. He's somebody that I think just judging by the reaction on Twitter, people want to see him in the UFC. They want to see him compete against others. And I think when you're a promotion that's not the UFC and people are calling for that, you're doing something right. That means people are invested in your fighter. So Ray Cooper emerging as kind of an A-lister in terms of free agents or guys outside the UFC would be my takeaway from the 2021 season.
Yeah, what a big development was there for him, and a big development for his bank account as well. He's doing all right over there in PFL. Goes, what about you? What stood out to you this year?
Well, Ray Cooper is a great one, Nolan. I love what he did. But for me, the biggest surprise was it was a great season. I thought it was very successful for them. But to not hear some of the big names on that last day, McDonald, Pettis, Verdum, I get maybe not hearing one, but not hearing any of them, that's a big deal to me. And on top of that, you have some of the veterans that have cashed some of these checks in the past. We didn't get to hear their names as well, right? So I think it was a little bit of a rude awakening, not just for the veterans, but some of the new signees that PFL isn't playing around. They're going to give you a tough schedule. They're going to bring in some top talent. So you really need to figure this system out if you want to be successful there. Because all the other fighters are catching up. And these free agent signings were pretty massive names that we thought were going to make a big splash in the PFL, and they didn't. And I think a lot of it has to do with fighters getting better, and it has to do with the system. You have to understand that system to be successful. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with Kayla Harrison. That's another big thing coming out of here. But overall, I thought the PFL was great this season.
Yeah, it was a fun year, but you're absolutely right. I think people used to look at it as like, hey, why don't you go over there and win that $1 million to these high-priced free agents? It's like, well, it's not that easy, man. You still got to go execute. But that shows, I think, the reason the investment in those free agents does make sense. Even if they don't win, it helps build some of those other names. Matt, what'd you take away this year?
Man, my biggest takeaway, Jesus, was the pacing of these cards, man. Listen, there were great stories like you guys have talked about. House Manfio, for one, for example, Antonio Carlos Jr., Shoeface getting it done, winning the $1 million. Those are great stories. But what took away from all of those great stories was the pacing of these cards, man. In the championship card, you had 6 title fights. So you already know you're in for potential 6 5-round fights. So we have a long night ahead of us. We know that going into it. But then when you still stretch them out like you did, you add in a musical performance, and then you add in multiple video packages between every single fight. And then you add in a recap of the musical performance along with the video package in between fights. There was literally an hour gap between fights on this card. Just insane. Get to the fights. Let us focus on these fights because the fights were incredible. However, I walk away feeling like, just disrespected by the time that the PFL expected out of us for those that wanted to sit and watch this entire card. There's no reason for that to happen. So they got to get that fixed for next year.
Yeah, I hate for the biggest takeaway to be a criticism, but that's a fair one, guys. It was a great show, and I feel like a lot of the momentum was lost just because of how long it was. I mean, like Capoloza D'Elia was one of the greatest heavyweight fights I've ever seen. I mean, there were some real highlights, but man, the length and the pacing of that show was just brutal. Hopefully, they could fix that. I don't know if that's a television production thing or that's something on their call, but guys, let's fix that for next season because that was a struggle to keep up with it. Guys, this weekend is absolutely loaded UFC event in New York City with UFC 268. We got 2 titles on the line, both of those big, high-profile rematches, and we got a number of matchups that look like they could absolutely steal the show. So give us a gold prediction. Make it gold, but actually let's make it bold as well of what we're going to see on Saturday night. Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Goes, you get it started.
My gold and bold prediction will be that this will be Zhang Weili's last fight in this division. I think that she's doing all the right things, okay? I love what she's doing in her preparation for Rose Namajunas, but I think it's going to be an epic battle. I think the coaches are going to have their hands full in the corner making adjustments every round. Everything she's done, I think, is great, but Rose Namajunas has that it factor. And it bothers me that when we talk about the GOATs of women's MMA, her name is starting to creep up there, the things that she's been able to do, Rose Namajunas. So I actually think this fight won't end the same way. I don't think it'll end early. I think it'll be a good fight. I think it'll go the distance, maybe even a split decision, who knows. But I don't think it'll be enough. I think Rose Namajunas has shown that she just knows how to win these types of fights, and that's going to leave Zhang Weili with 2 losses against the champion. And she has this type of drive in her that I don't see her just kind of treading water in a division. I think that's going to anger her, and I think she's going to move up. I think it's the last fight we see in this division for her.
Wow, that is bold, and it's crazy to think about. It's possibly true, and it's somebody that I think, at least I personally thought was about ready to go on one of these Yoyani and Jacek type runs, so to think that this could be the end of the division, that could be intriguing to say the least. Matt, what about you? What do you see bold happening at UFC 268?
I don't know how bold it is because this man is an underdog, but I expect Frankie Edgar to get it done. The former champ, I could see going out there and getting it done. It's a home game for him. He's fighting Marlon Vera, who's very tough, by the way. I love Marlon Vera's game, so it's not a knock against him. I can just see this being one of those feel-good hometown stories, good victory for Frankie Edgar. And if you look at it, something does bode well for him. Marlon Vera's traded wins and losses in his last 4 or 5 fights, and he won his last one, so it's time to catch another L if you're Marlon Vera. And I think the former champ can get it done in the home crowd. Just imagine how the arena would blow up when they hear Frankie Edgar and as announced as the winner and him getting his hand raised. That's what I'm here for. So I think Frankie Edgar will get it done.
I'm imagining it, man. It would be quite the scene inside of Madison Square Garden, to say the least. I mean, you laid out the MMA math. We all know the MMA math works perfectly, so you've set it up there. It's definitely going to happen. Look, Cheeto Vera is certainly no pushover. I mean, that's going to be a tough one, but for Frankie to be able to get it done inside Madison Square Garden would be quite special, to say the least. What a scene that would be. Nolan, what about you? Give us a bold prediction for this weekend. What are we going to see?
I think the main event is going to be a lot less close than the first fight. I think Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington 2. If you guys have watched this show before, that's the fight that I wanted to see. I called for it. I thought it was the 2 best welterweights in the world fighting for the belt. That's what championship fights should be. However, I think that the gap has widened since the first fight between Usman and Covington. I think Kamaru Usman has shown vast improvements in his recent performances. Colby, we've only got to see him once, and it was against Tyron Woodley, who I think his stock has hit an all-time low at this point. While Colby was very dominant in that fight, his output was great. I don't necessarily think we saw improvements, things that were better or different than the one he showed up with to the Usman fight. So for me, I'm kind of thinking that Kamaru Usman's really going to control this fight, take it over, and maybe get Colby out of there sooner than he did in the first fight. People have this recollection that Usman whipped him, and certainly he did at the end of the first one. But it was competitive. I mean, Colby had his moments in that fight. Some people had it 2-2 going into the 5th. I think I had it 3-1, if I recall correctly. But I just definitely think Usman is the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. He's improving. He's finishing very, very tough guys and making it look easy. So that's kind of my bold prediction, is that Usman makes this one look a lot easier than the last time they fought.
What an incredible statement that would be, right? And you lay out the case there why it could absolutely happen. I mean, I'm excited for this rematch. Take all the trash talk and all the rivalry out of it. As you said, this is number 1 versus number 2 in the world, and I love that. And I do feel like Colby Covington has the best style in the division to give the champ a run. But as you said, Usman just continues to elevate. It seems like every time out there, his game gets better and better. And if he could go out and do something emphatic, boy, what a statement that would be that he is, without question, the number one pound-for-pound fighter on the planet right now. Well, I can't wait. I will be out there in Madison Square Garden. Mike Bond will be joining out there. So we will have you covered for MMA Junkie. Of course, we got Bellator happening this weekend. Things are always going to be busy, and we'll talk about it all next week.